Welcome to Pluralsight. I'm Joshua Sampson, professional filmmaker and film mentor, and this course is beginning 2D animation in After Effects. Now, obviously, if you are interested in creating 2D animations, this is a great course for you. But the techniques and the elements that we're going to talk about while creating these 2D animations in After Effects apply beyond just computer 2D animation. They're the basics that you're going to need to know in order to do 2D animation, 3D animation, even traditional animation, but it can also be applied to simple things like creating motion graphics or moving animated title cards for film or video makers. So again, it is a pretty broad concept, and in this case, we're just doing it in After Effects because that is a pretty standard software to know. So we're going to start off in this module about talking about different types of motion for you to consider before you actually start animating. We're going to break down movement into smaller pieces so that you can start to really realize how many different layers, how many different objects you need to create a character, to create a space, what have you. And then we're going to talk about reference video and how helpful it can be in planning out your animation. So this first module is really all about starting to study movement, because that's what animation is. It's bringing life into an object that otherwise would not seem alive by applying motion to them. So let's start off with different types of motion. So you can have a simple motion if you want. Let's take a gander at what a simple motion would be like. In this case, this big guy just kind of moves as one whole mass. You notice his feet didn't move, his hands didn't move, his eyes didn't move. He just moved onto the screen and stopped. That's a very simple motion. So let's look at a slightly more complicated motion. Here he is, and his feet are moving now. So you can see that even though it's not a necessarily realistic depiction of somebody walking, simply the act of his feet moving up and down gives him a little bit more life. Let's complicate it even more. So now his feet are moving, his arms are moving, his hips are moving. When he stops, he slides back into space, and then his head turns down. So you can see that this third animation has the most life of any of them, and it's a much more complicated motion. Next thing we're going to talk about is motion paths. You basically have to decide, does your animation travel in a straight line, or does it travel in a curved line? Because they seem different. Again, here is our character just rising straight up out of the ground, as opposed to him kind of jumping up in an arc and then hitting the ground. Lastly, we're going to talk about motion speed. Here we go. It's a relatively slow, again, very simple animation. He moves very slowly. That feels a certain way, as opposed to a much faster straight motion. So in this first one, it ramps up, starts off a little slower, speeds up in the middle, and then slows down right before he hits. It kind of buffers the movement, as opposed to just constantly moving at the exact same speed throughout that arch. So that's another element that you want to think of. So before we move on, what I want you to do is break down the kind of animation that you want to start off with. Is it a relatively simple motion? Is it a more complicated motion? What is the path of the motion? And then what kind of speeds are going to be involved? And is it constant speed or ramped up or down speed? Once you figure out what you want to do, then come on back and watch the next one.